Hi, I'm Jasmine, a math major at Waterloo. So one day, I received an email from Oxford Study Courses promoting their free IB webinar series. So of course, I took advantage of it and I signed up for all webinars that were relevant to me. At the time, this was English, math, and chemistry. Specifically, HL math and HL chemistry. And for those of you that have heard of OIC, or even purchased some other IB products, that's great. But I know many of you who clicked on this video who don't know about OIC are just struggling IB math students who want some advice about exams. So I'll keep this short. OIC is a really nice website that offers practice exams, videos, flashcards, and much more to help you with your IB journey. It's kind of like Revision Village, for those who know that, but it covers many more subjects than just math. And by the way, this is not a sponsored video. I just really like the webinars that I attended, and I want more people to know about them. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. Here are my tips and tricks for the IB HL math exam. Tip number 1. If you don't know the answer to a question, literally just guess. And if you don't take away anything else from this video, you should remember this. Leaving a question completely blank versus writing something down could have a huge difference in your exam. So for example, I did this on a test, by the way, not an exam, but I couldn't find the volume of a solid of revolution on the test. So instead of maybe like leaving the question blank and skipping it, I just wrote down 500 and then moved on, because I saw that there were other parts in that same question that required the information that I couldn't get. So I knew that if I couldn't do part A, I also couldn't do part B and part C and so on. And I ended up getting a pretty decent mark. And even though I missed the part where you had to actually find the volume, everything else seemed fine. And this is because IB has a marking system called errors carried forward, and I honestly think that all of math teachers mark the same way, because they kind of think of it like this. If you get one part wrong and the other two parts underneath it require this one part, it's not fair to lose every mark just because you got part A wrong. And so what they'll do instead is, if you get part A wrong, that's fine, but if you did part B and C correctly, then you'll get full marks for those two questions. Or maybe not full marks. Some teachers might take a mark off for not getting the correct answer. But in IB at least, you will get full marks on parts B and C and D and whatever other parts that need part A, even if you get part A wrong. So let's do like a small example. Let's say part A is to ask you to find a solution to this equation. 3x plus 7 equals 10. And you wrote x equals 2 instead of x equals 1. So then you use x equals 2 to do part B. Let's say part B is use part A to find the value of 5x. And you get the answer of 10. You'd only get part A wrong, and you would get full marks on part B. But yeah, it's a very simple idea. Something is better than nothing. Tip number 2. Do the questions that you know how to do first. Actually, like when I was in middle school and high school, I used to answer every single question in order. Like, I don't know why I would do this, but I guess I kind of felt like if I knew how to do every question, then it didn't really matter what order I did them in. So I just did them in the order that they were given to me. But once I got to IB and the math started getting exponentially harder, there became like so many questions that I didn't know how to do. And so I would basically just skip over questions that I didn't know. Or actually what I do now in university is that I like to put a little check mark next to questions that I know that I can do for sure, and then I make sure that I do those first to get those points, and then focus on questions that I might have to think a little bit harder in order to get them. Tip number 3, don't be afraid to get things wrong. So basically, examiners usually ask you 2 questions when you're marking. The first is, did the student get the right answer? And the second is, did the student show work? If the answer to either of those questions is no, so like you showed work but you got the wrong answer, you can still get part marks for the work. Or you did not show work but you got the right answer, you can still get marks for the answer. So only if the answer to both of those questions is no, then you get no marks. So let's say you skipped over a question that you weren't sure about, and then you didn't have time to go back to that question later. If you absolutely wrote down nothing, then you're going to get 0 marks because there's no evidence of you understanding the question or how to do it at all. But let's say maybe you weren't sure about it, but you wrote down an equation or you wrote down something. You might still get part marks from that something, even if the answer is wrong. So don't be afraid of getting questions wrong. Let's take a slight intermission and break down the IB/HL math exam, because I'm pretty sure that 90% of those who are watching this video have no idea what the exam even looks like. So 20% of your HL math mark is based on your IA mark, and that really can't be changed. But 80% of your mark comes from the final exam. And so it's 30% for paper 1, which is 110 marks. It's 2 hours long, and there's 12 questions in total. 9 are short answer, and 3 are long answer. It's 30% for paper 2, which is also 110 marks. It's 2 hours, and also same as paper 1, it has 12 questions, 9 short answer, 3 long answer. And lastly, 20% is for paper 3, which is 55 marks. So pretty much half the amount of marks as paper 1 and 2, but also half the amount of time, which I suppose is fair. It's 1 hour, and only 2 questions, surprisingly, but these questions are long. Like when I was taking the exam, it was like 1 page long for all the parts. So buckle up, it's really long questions. It also might be kind of reassuring to know that 40% of the questions on an HL math paper is literally copy-paste from that year's SL paper. Pretty much almost half the exam on HL is SL topics, so not the HL extension at all. Tip number 4, which might be like a pretty rare tip, or I'm not sure how many people out there give this tip, but I'd say out of all the topics, you need to be prioritizing calculus. Because if you look at the proportion of time that you spend on each topic, or even the number of sections in your textbook, you can see that calculus has the most sections and the most proportion of time that you spend on it. The next biggest topic is geometry. And after that, the very last topic is functions. So this doesn't mean that you shouldn't be studying functions at all, because it's the least amount of marks on the exam. You should still study it, but work on it last, so that even if you don't get around to studying functions, you can still lose the least amount of marks. Tip number 5 is an important tip that I learned from watching watching the webinar that I attended. So basically, there's two sections on paper 1 and 2. So there's section A and there's section B. So section A is basically the short answer question, and section B is long answer. And you have to know that section B has half or more of all the marks on the paper. Like legit. So if you answer 9 out of 12 questions and all 9 of those questions are on section A, you're gonna get a really low mark, or you might even fail the exam, despite having answered 3/4 of the questions. So be sure that you do not skip section B, and you try to allocate pretty much just as much time to section B as section A. So tip number 6. Do not round to anything other than 3 sig figs on paper 2. And on paper 1, you really shouldn't be rounding at all because you don't have a calculator. And I guess you know that pi is 3.14, but instead of writing 3.14, you really just should be writing the symbol pi. And for paper 2, it gets a little bit complicated. So basically, usually you shouldn't round to anything other than 3 sig figs, and you should follow that rule of thumb. But there is a slight exception, and that's for finance questions. So for example, if you were to get a question on annuities, you would always want to round to 2 decimal places, because money is usually dealt in 2 decimal places. Okay, tip number 7. So on paper 2, if you want to show work, a sketch of a graph is usually enough. So if you happen to get a really crazy expression that you absolutely don't know how to factor or simplify, just graph it. That's what your graphing calculator is for. And that way you can find the key features of the graph, and then you'll be able to sketch it out and maybe earn marks from it. And tip number 8, it's not really a tip. It's just a comprehensive list of all the topics that will be covered on the exam. So these are organized by topic, and you can see them on screen right now. And here's a tip that was not included in the webinar that I watched. Basically, don't wait till the last minute to start studying for the exam. So I know in IB, you still have classes going on, you still have assignments, you still have homework, but really try to spend maybe an hour every single day, maybe for 2 weeks leading up before classes end, in order to try to study for your exam. Because that way you can get a lot more studying in, even if it's only an hour a day. And you can also prepare more adequately for the exam. And also, you should be working on practice exams as well. Don't neglect doing practice papers, because those papers will give you a good idea of how the exam is actually going to go. And you can also time yourself and make sure that you're managing time properly. And yeah, those are all my tips for the IBHL math exam. Good luck on your exam if you haven't written it already. And I will see you in the next one.